God. Dude. Oh my God. Oh my God. That's like a 10. Oh my God. Oh my God. If you've been watching my videos lately, I've been talking a lot about flipping a jig in the grass. There it is, 3/4 ounce jig, menace grub, and that's like a 10-pounder. Oh my gosh. Oh my God, dude. We're gonna get this fish in the live well. I gotta weigh that. That's the biggest one I've ever caught on Lake Guntersville. Oh my God. All right, stay tuned.
That's a big old fish, no matter what. Is that on there good? Yeah. 7 pounds. 14 ounces.
I was a little off. 7 3/4.
Oh man.
714.
So I still haven't broke 8. I still haven't broken 8 pounds yet on this lake.
You were real close.
We're real close. Thank you, Pat.
Yes, sir.
All right, we're gonna get her back. Almost an 8-pounder. Thankfully, Pat Kennemer was here, and thankfully, Matt Adams was here. And we're gonna release this big, almost 8-pounder. Probably was maybe an 8-pounder a couple weeks ago. I appreciate y'all for letting me use your scale.
Oh yeah, yes sir. Good
That
job.
was convenient.
It's a heck of a fish.
Yeah, we could have used that. Could have used that last Saturday.
Should have been about 9.
Yeah.
Should have been about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
She'd have been a monster.
Yeah, I decided not to. Welcome back to the channel. That was exciting. Not 10 pounds, but close to 8. 2 ounces away from 8 pounds. So one of the biggest ones I've ever caught. I think in 2014, I caught a 792. So that's also about 714. But I'm going to give you a little bit of the bait that I've been catching them on. This is basically the same jig that I've done in videos recently. 1 ounce Strike King Hack Attack jig. I also flip a 3/4 ounce Bose jig. I don't think Bo is with us anymore, but he used to make a really awesome jig. This is the one I just caught the bass on, but I'm in a little bit deeper water on this spot, so I'm going to go to a 1 ounce. But I've put them both in the videos. Really, the only difference is the head design is slightly different, not really different at all. As far as less or more bites, but this has a bigger hook. So I guess originally this was like a close to a tuna hook, but this is a Siwash 4/0. It's a big flipping hook. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I didn't get the best hook set on that fish. Kind of fell into it. I didn't like it. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if I would have had this big Siwash hook for that hook set, because I didn't get good wood on it, it probably would have come off. So this is a double-edged sword anytime you are flipping in the grass with a big jig, because it's hard to feel them. That fish must have ate it and just darted out of the grass. And when I set the hook on mostly slack line. That's why I think the 7'9" and longer rod is very important, because you need to pick up a lot of line. I think the 50-pound braid is very important because you don't want any stretch. And then depending on how they're biting and how it's going for you, the thick wire gauge hook isn't always going to be the best option. Now, if you are really in tune with your bait and the second it hits the water, you can feel them bite it, I would go with the thicker gauge wire hook. But in that case, I almost can guarantee you that if I would have set the hook the way I did on all that slack line with this Siwash, the thicker gauge wire hook, I wouldn't have been able to get this thicker hook in that fish. So on that Bose jig, it is like a normal jig hook. You know, it's probably a little bit stronger than a medium wire gauge. It's still like a heavy gauge. It's just not super heavy. And you can kind of see I straightened that hook out a little bit, not much, bent it out a little bit. But yeah, I'm kind of just playing with some different options. You know, I don't know Sometimes that bigger Siwash hook leaves a humongous hole in the fish's mouth. And then a lot of times, especially when you're catching 714s with this regular flipping gauge wire, I would say this is the same gauge wire as like a normal flipping hook that you would probably put it on fluorocarbon. It bends it out. So it really, I'm playing with that. That's something I'm trying to figure out, because you don't want to get it in your head to where, you're afraid to set the hook hard, but you also don't want to yank a big hole in the fish's mouth every time either. So you really got to kind of play with it. The rod, the reel, always a high-speed reel, but long rod I think is very important. I've talked a lot about the 50-pound braid being important. So those are some keys to this technique. But again, you have, 8 to 10 feet of line out when you're setting the hook. So you're not short lining them in 2 feet of water. But with saying that, it is still heavy cover fishing, big fish, So I moved areas. I'm in a little bit different area here. This is a little road bed that we're sitting in 9 feet right here. And I'm about to be flipping up in 5. I think the deal is cover water, because where I just caught that big one, I started on my waypoint and then I fished about 200 yards and then I got a bite. So I think the deal still is post spawn. Fish are kind of trickling out of these areas, and you want steep cover, or steep structure rather, with some cover on it is what I'm doing. So I am on a road bed, which is going to be a little hard spot, and then the road bed where I'm fishing it is kind of right on the break. So grass is getting up there. I switched from that 3/4 to this 1 ounce, because I'm fishing pretty fast. Seven feet of water here. So cover water. What kills me about that 714 is that I caught a 6-pounder there last Thursday, a week ago Thursday, a couple days before that BFL, and it was skinny. That one was skinny too, and I just didn't think it was smart to go in there, so I didn't go in there. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I should have. That kind of wouldn't have been, it would have kind of been right in the wind. I don't know if that bank would have been any good. But I will say this, these earlier times of the year when this bite starts picking up, I do like to find a hard edge. So you could see I was fishing right next to a bank. If I don't have a hard edge, it seems like the fish kind of scatter. So what you really want is you want either the grass topped out, which will make a hard edge. So if the grass was topped out in this big open area, that would make a hard edge. That would give them something to really hold on. If you don't have a lot of grass topped out yet, which I don't, so I'm probably not going to fish here very long, you want like a bank, like that, the last spot that we were fishing. It was right up against the bank. So steep, you want steep banks, but in these earlier months, you really want there be a hard edge, like a bank. And you can, once the grass grows up, we get further into June, July, August, then all of this is going to play out here. But it might be a little early for this. I just kind of wanted to come out and check it, because some of this grass is topping out. We're getting to that part of the year. I don't know, if you live here in the Southeast, you probably have already cut your grass. Seems like we're getting to the point where we're almost having to cut our grass more than once a week. So the lake is doing the same thing. The grass is kind of exploding here in the last 2 weeks. So a lot of this stuff probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks is going to be topped out, depending on what depth. You know, by July, all that will just be covered with grass. There'll be a good hard edge out here. I just kind of want to come out and check this. But if you've watched any of my videos lately, this is, you know, this is what what I've been talking about. This heavy jig getting that reaction bite on steep banks. Steep banks, what you want to fish in the post spawn. And one thing I will go into about my technique with this, because I really started catching them doing this about 10 years ago, is like, so I'm sitting in 8 feet right here. When I throw that bait out there, I kind of throw a big bow in my line, because you want that bait to fall on a slack line. So that's why I think this 50-pound braid is important. It gets that bait down. 65 is going to be too heavy, especially if you have a little bit of wind. We don't have a whole lot of wind today, but 65, the bait just doesn't fall right on 65. You really need it on 50. And then if I don't throw that big bow in my line, then pull a couple feet off, and then I can feel it. I can feel it get to the bottom. So you don't want there to be any tension on that line when it falls. You want it to be completely slack until it gets to the bottom. And then what you will feel when you get a bite, it'll either be just kind of pulling, and that doesn't always mean that the fish is pulling away from you. Sometimes the line will be wrapped around the grass and it'll actually be going to the side or coming back towards you. So that's why I really like to bring in as much line anytime you're jig fishing. Reel, and set. 50 is still a heavy enough braid to where, you know, that's heavy braid. A lot of us use 65 when we're punching mats and we got to pull them out of cover and all that. But so there's a huge bow in my line right there. So without even pulling any line off, flipping that bait into 6 feet of water, it fell all the way to the bottom before it made any tension. That line was still laying on the surface of the water. But that's pretty much it, guys. It's like any other time you're jig fishing. Patience and confidence are the two most important things. You're going to go time without bites, but then when you do get a bite, it's going to be the biggest fish on the lake. 7 to 14, that would have won big fish in the tournament we had last week. That might have won big fish in any of days of that Toyota series as well. I don't know if there was an 8-pounder weighed in there. So absolute giant, and you could tell it was skinny. It had already spawned out. So biggest fish on the lake. That's what and I cannot believe that I just had to go back and check that area. So last Saturday I had a tournament out here, and 2 days before the tournament I caught a 6-pounder in there, and I just didn't think there was anything else in there. I thought it was, but you know, a lot can change in a week. Who knows if I would have went in there, what would have happened. But man, that was a big one. Pretty monotonous fishing until you do get a bite, and then it's very exciting. And I still think it is a little bit early for this technique. Once these fish really start moving off the ledges and they get back into the grass, they'll actually start to school up when they first start doing this. Right now, I think they're more in that post-spawn pattern. They're not far away from spawning, and they're just trickling out here. They're kind of in a weird mood. That one big meal that I always talk about is definitely what they're liking about this jig, but I think a lot of these fish still got to get out on the ledges, be out there for a little bit, and then start grouping up good and then getting back into the grass. But this is it. You know, you gotta find those steeper banks, and then that'll pretty much, doesn't matter if it's grass, doesn't matter if it's wood or whatever, but you need some type of cover on vertical banks. Go with a 3/4 and a 1 ounce jig. Even if I'm fishing around trees with this bigger jig, anytime I'm over like a 5/8, heavier than a 5/8 jig, it's going to be braided line, just because I think that jig is falling so fast that the line isn't really going to spook the fish. They're either going to bite it or they're going to be spooked just by how quickly that jig is coming at them. And when you get this big of a jig, kind of how my hook set went earlier, you can't have any stretch. You need to give them the meat. So always braid when I'm heavier than 5/8, and that's not just the jig. Also, when I'm flipping a Texas rig, if I go above 3/4 on my weight, I'm usually using such a heavy weight because I'm around some type of grass. It's not always topped out or, you know, punching type stuff, but you still need that heavier weight to get through the grass. And then that's when I'll go with braid. So and there's other situations you could use braid on lighter, you know, lighter weight Texas rigs. You know, if I'm down in Florida or if I'm on a place like Ross Barnett where you have really dark water, you're flipping around reeds or something, and you know, those fish can really get a lot of torque on you if they go into those reed heads. So that this line is also going to cut the grass. So braid's really important in those situations. Now, if you're fishing around wood, I try to stay away from braid, because what that braid wants to do is cut and dig. So what it'll do is just dig into that wood, and then you'll be in trouble. So anytime I'm around wood and I'm under, you know, 5/8, it's going to be fluorocarbon. 5/8 and lighter, it's going to be fluorocarbon. Now, if I'm going to take this big 1 ounce jig and fish around docks or something, that's kind of a rarity for me. Typically when I'm doing that is there's some grass alongside of the docks and I'm flipping around the grass, and then I come to the dock, I skip one under. I have done that quite a bit and have caught some fish doing that. Just don't have time to be changing jigs. And a lot of times you'll find when there's that much grass growing around the docks, it's kind of also getting in under and tucked around the docks. So you need that heavier weight. Or those docks may be in, you know, 6 or 7 feet of water, so you need that bigger weight to get in there. But this is a great way in the post spawn. You're trying to get away from all those people that are out ledge fishing. Get close to these ledges, get on the last steep structure around it, because not all of those fish are going to go straight to the ledges. Talked about this in my other videos, but you have the bluegill, you have fry garters, you have a lot of reasons to get on these types of banks. And it's not always so much about the cover, it's It's more so about the structure and finding those little sweet spots in the structure, and then there'll be cover there. But like I said, guys, another month or two, more fish will be doing this. They'll be in the grass and they'll be schooled up. So try a 1 ounce jig from here all the way to the fall. Biggest fish on the lake. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.